We were sent to clear an area in Afghanistan, but what we found there shouldn't exist. A creature, a force no man was meant to face, waiting in the mountains. And once we stepped into that valley, there was no turning back. I was a sergeant, part of a recon unit. It was 2012, somewhere deep in the mountains of Afghanistan, where the landscape seems like it could swallow you whole. Our mission, on paper at least, was simple: gather intel, track enemy movements, and clear a patch of land. Standard recon. But the reality of it was far from standard. The operation was called Operation Red Dawn. It wasn't a secret, but it wasn't exactly public knowledge either. We'd been briefed in the usual sterile, cold room, no windows, just a projector and a map on the wall. A dozen tired soldiers sat around the table, leaning in to get the details. Everyone had been through this kind of thing before, but this one felt different. The objective was clear: head into a mountainous area where WED set up observation posts, gather intel and report back. No heavy combat expected. We'd been given M4S, standard issue night vision goggles and radios. Everything we needed for a recon. But when we were suited up and ready to roll, something about the briefing room stuck with me. The officers kept their eyes on the map, never once glancing at us. The air was thick with tension. The mission felt almost off. Something I couldn't put my finger on, but I knew it wasn't just another day in the field. The briefing was shorter than usual, but I remember one of the senior officers, Colonel Harris, kept repeating one phrase: low priority, high secrecy. Now, we all know what that means. High secrecy usually means they're hiding something, and low priority means we're the ones doing the dirty work. But no one ever said it outright. They didn't need to. We understood. But there was more. Something strange happened after the briefing. Our local interpreter, a man who had worked with us before, pulled me aside. His eyes were wide and his voice was barely a whisper when he said, "Don't trust the land. It watches." He wasn't one for jokes. In fact, I don't think I had ever heard him speak like that before. His warning hit me in a way I didn't understand at the time. I thought it was just the stress of the mission getting to him, but now I know better. He walked off before I could ask him what he meant, leaving me standing there, the words hanging in the air. But that wasn't the only odd thing. The map they gave us had an area marked as uninhabitable. No other explanation, just that. The area wasn't listed as enemy territory or hostile land, just uninhabitable. It seemed like something you'd find on a tourist map, not one meant for military use. I glanced around at the others, but no one seemed to take notice. Maybe they were too used to the oddities. After all, things like this weren't unheard of. But when you've been in the field long enough, you start to trust your gut. The ride to the area was nothing special. Our vehicles rolled through the dusty roads, heading deeper into the mountains. But with each mile, the air seemed to grow heavier. I kept looking back at the map, tracing the edges of that uninhabitable area, wondering if it meant something more than we were being told. The sun set quickly, and we set up camp as darkness crept in. The only sounds were the wind and the occasional rustling of distant wildlife. But something about the night felt wrong. You could feel it in the silence, the way the wind didn't move the trees. There was an oppressive stillness. I thought I was just imagining it, but as I looked at my squad, no one spoke, no one moved. It was as if we were all waiting for something. We went through the motions, scanning, setting up the observation posts, securing our perimeter. But the whole time, that uneasy feeling never left. It wasn't just the terrain, it was like the land itself was watching us. I brushed it off, just nerves, but deep down I knew something was wrong. And that's when I realized we weren't just there to gather intel. But that was only the beginning. The convoy rolled out just after sunrise, the steady hum of the engines and the occasional clink of gear the only sounds breaking the early morning stillness. We were already used to this kind of mission, just another recon, another check-in with nothing special on the horizon. It felt routine. Everyone in the unit was cracking jokes, talking about everything from football to the latest bad movie they'd seen. It was the kind of banter that keeps you going when the days blur together. We were all focused on the mission ahead, not thinking about what might actually be out there. The convoy moved in a loose formation, our vehicles kicking up dust as we crossed the rugged terrain. It was nothing we hadn't seen before. Rocky roads, sparse desert stretches, the occasional flash of distant mountains. The kind of place where you always felt like you were being watched, but not by anything human, just the land. Or maybe it was just my nerves, but I kept catching glimpses of the sky above, like something was out of place there. It didn't feel right, but it was something I couldn't shake. Still, I told myself it was just part of the job. We were inserted by chopper a few hours later, just outside the nearest village. The locals there usually kept to themselves, but they weren't unfriendly. You'd often hear a few kids running around or the women washing clothes in the streams. But this time, something was off. The village was unnervingly quiet. No sounds, not even the usual chatter of people going about their day. There was an empty feeling in the air, like the place was holding its breath. We'd been told the area was safe, so we continued our patrol without hesitation, but the silence in the village lingered like a bad omen. The streets were empty. The houses, usually filled with life, stood cold and deserted. No one was in sight. It was like they all disappeared, leaving no trace behind. "Maybe it's just a slow day," one of the guys said, trying to shrug off the tension in the air. We all nodded, but deep down, something felt wrong. As we moved past the village, I noticed another thing. There were no animals. No goats, no dogs, not even a bird in the sky. Just empty silence. It was eerie. And the locals? They were avoiding us. Not in the usual way, they were straight up hiding. I caught one woman watching us from behind a doorway, her eyes wide with fear, but the moment I looked her way, she disappeared into the shadows. We pushed forward, the unease growing with every step. We were trained to focus on the mission, to block out distractions. But that's not always easy when something feels out of place. The squad started to get a little more tense, too. Small glances, a few whispered words. The usual routine was starting to fall apart. I caught my breath as I saw one of the guys fiddling with his rifle, the same guy who was joking around earlier. He wasn't laughing anymore. We passed a few more empty buildings, their walls cracked and weathered. The landscape around us grew more barren. The silence wasn't just eerie, it was suffocating. You could feel it pressing down on you, the weight of it pulling at your chest. But we kept moving, pushed forward by the mission and the need to stay on track. There wasn't much time to question what we couldn't understand. Then we reached the site. That's when everything changed. There was something in the air that didn't belong. At first, it was just the feeling that you get when you walk into a room that's been empty for too long. A kind of stillness, like everything's holding its breath, waiting for something. It was so thick that you could almost taste it. The squad was on edge too, barely saying anything as we made our way deeper into the site. The ground was rocky, but something about the way the dirt shifted under our boots felt off. We weren't moving through the normal kind of terrain you'd expect. No, this felt wrong. There were no animal tracks, no signs of movement, just the crunch of our boots against earth. The silence was almost too perfect, too absolute. It wasn't the kind of quiet you find in the desert. This wasn't nature. It was unnatural. At first, we chalked it up to nerves. The area was known for being desolate, but something kept nagging at me. I tried to focus on the mission, to push those thoughts aside, but they wouldn't go away. It wasn't just the silence. There was something else, something we couldn't explain. That's when I noticed the footprints. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, but as we moved closer, they became clearer. Large, heavy prints, deep in the sand, as if something massive had walked across the site. I stopped in my tracks. These weren't just any footprints. They were unlike anything I'd ever seen before. The depth of them suggested a heavy creature, maybe over 200 pounds, but there was something off about their shape. They weren't human, not entirely. They were too wide, too far apart, and there was a trail that led deeper into the site, the prints leading us straight into the heart of this eerie silence. I radioed the others, trying to mask the unease in my voice. "Anyone else seeing this?" I asked, hoping someone had a logical explanation. But when I turned around, I saw it in their eyes. They knew it too. This wasn't just a normal patrol anymore. This wasn't just recon. One of the guys, Miller, muttered, "Must be some kind of wild animal, right? Could be a bear or something." But none of us bought it. There weren't any bears here, not in this part of the country. We were way too high up in the mountains. Whatever this was, it wasn't natural. It wasn't supposed to be here. The tension was building, but we kept moving, following the trail as it twisted through the rocks. The footprints seemed to lead us deeper into the area where the village had been. But the further we went, the more things felt wrong. The air felt colder, thicker, and the equipment started to glitch. First, it was the radios. The static came in harsh and fast, like the signal was being scrambled by something we couldn't see. Then it was the night vision. It started to flicker, like the power wasn't enough to keep it running. It didn't make sense. We were using standard issue gear that had never failed us before. And now, it was malfunctioning in the middle of the mission? The deeper we went, the more the world around us started to feel distorted. The temperature dropped in sharp waves, like someone had suddenly turned off the sun and cranked up the cold. My breath was visible now, the frost forming on the edges of my rifle. It didn't make sense. The air was still dry, the kind of heat that should have been in the middle of the day. But this was wrong. Then, we reached the clearing. The first thing I saw was the symbol. It was carved into the stone, deep gouges that had been there for who knows how long. Ancient, faded, but still clear enough to make my skin crawl. It wasn't something I'd ever seen before. Not any kind of military marking. Not any kind of ancient symbol I recognized. It was like it was out of place. The lines were sharp, deliberate, and they seemed to pulse with some kind of energy, like they were alive. I wanted to turn away from it, but I couldn't. It was like it was pulling me in. One of the men, Harris, knelt beside it, tracing the lines with his fingers. I could see his expression change as he touched it. His face went pale. He didn't say anything, but I saw it. He looked up at the rest of us, his eyes wide, like he'd seen something beyond what any of us could understand. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed something else. Bones. Just a few at first, lying scattered around the site. They weren't animal bones, though. They were human. I moved closer, hesitant but driven by something I couldn't explain. The bones were old, broken, scattered across the dirt. Some were half buried. Others just left to rot in the open. I tried not to think about it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't supposed to be here, that we weren't meant to see this. The symbols, the bones, it was all wrong. And then it hit me. The silence, the oppressive, suffocating silence. The wind had stopped. No birds, no distant howls. It was like the world had gone still, holding its breath, waiting for something. I couldn't put it into words, but I knew. We weren't alone anymore. But that was just the beginning. The moment the mission shifted from something tactical to something beyond comprehension came in a way I didn't expect. It wasn't sudden, but when it happened, it felt like the ground beneath us had tilted, like we had crossed into a place where nothing made sense anymore. We were standing in that eerie clearing, the bones scattered around us, the strange symbols etched into the stone. I could feel the tension building. It wasn't just the wind that had stopped, it was everything. Time itself seemed to hold its breath. The cold was unbearable now, seeping into my bones, and the air felt thick, like it was pushing back against us. I tried to focus on the mission, get in, collect what we could, and get out, but the uneasy feeling wouldn't go away. Then came the real shock. It was a sound, something distant but unmistakable. At first, I thought it was the wind picking up again, but there was no wind. This was different. It was a low, guttural growl, deep in the earth, like something was stirring beneath us. A growl I could feel in my chest, not just here. It didn't make sense. My heart rate spiked, and I glanced around at the rest of the squad. They heard it too. One of the guys, Rodriguez, shifted nervously. "Did anyone else hear that?" he whispered, but his voice was shaky. No one answered. We were all too busy listening. The growl came again, louder this time, closer, but it wasn't just the growl that had me frozen in place. It was the silence that followed. Everything went dead quiet, like the world itself had been muted. The radios went first, a sharp crackle, static so loud it made my teeth ache. I tried to speak into mine, but all I got was garbled noise. Then the night vision goggles started flickering, their green glow dying out and flickering back to life like they were struggling to stay functional. This wasn't a power failure. The gear was working just fine when we left the base. There was no reason for it to be malfunctioning now. But the worst part? The interpreter. The man who had warned me about the land. He had been standing next to me, his expression calm up until that moment. But when the growl sounded again, his eyes widened, panic flashing across his face like a storm. I'd never seen him like this, never seen him scared. He dropped his rifle without thinking, his hands shaking as he tried to grab onto my arm. "We need to leave. Now," he said, his voice low but urgent, almost pleading. He had never spoken to me like that before, especially not during a mission. He wasn't just nervous, he was terrified. It was the first time I had ever seen him lose his composure. "Listen to me," he said, his voice trembling. "This place, it's cursed. It's not just the land, it's what's buried here, what's still here." I turned to the rest of the squad, expecting them to brush it off, but their faces mirrored my own fear. They were starting to get nervous too. I could see it in their eyes. They were no longer questioning their senses. They were starting to believe what we'd all been trying to ignore. I ordered everyone to fall back, but as we moved, the growl came again, louder, closer, and this time it wasn't just a sound. It felt like something was walking toward us, something big. The ground seemed to vibrate beneath our feet. I could hear footsteps, but there was no one there, just the deafening sound of something moving through the darkness. We quickened our pace, but then there was a shadow. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, but then it moved. It was tall, too tall, and it was standing just beyond the reach of our lights. It wasn't human. It wasn't anything I had seen before. The shape was wrong. I couldn't make out details, but I could feel its presence. It was watching us. I reached for my weapon, my hand shaking. I wasn't supposed to feel fear like this. I was supposed to be in control. But nothing about this felt like control. It felt like something far beyond what we were trained for. The shadow moved again, this time closer. Then the air went cold, freezing. I could see my breath. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I was about to call for the retreat, but before I could, I heard it. A voice. Soft, almost a whisper, but loud enough to make me freeze. It wasn't a man's voice. It wasn't anything human. "Leave, now." But nothing could have prepared us for what came next. We tried to keep our distance, but the moment the shadow moved, everything changed. It wasn't human, nothing like anything I'd ever seen. It was tall, impossibly tall, with limbs that stretched and curved in unnatural angles. It wasn't just in the shadows, it was the shadows. The way it glided across the ground, it felt like reality itself was warping around it. I raised my rifle, but when I tried to fire, it jammed. Every weapon in the squad failed. Nothing worked. Then, the growl came again, deeper, louder, shaking the air. And that's when it attacked. The creature moved so fast I didn't even have time to react. Miller was the first to go down, thrown backward like a rag doll. His body hit the ground with a sickening thud, lifeless. We opened fire, but the bullets passed right through it, no impact, no resistance. It was like firing at smoke. And then it turned its focus on Johnson. Before any of us could do anything, it reached out, grabbing him by the throat with a single spindly arm. I watched as his body went limp, his neck snapping with a sickening crack. It lifted him off the ground as if he weighed nothing. In that moment I saw it, the face, or what passed for one. Dark, empty pits where eyes should be, and a mouth that seemed to swallow the light around it. I could feel it inside my head, its voice, "Leave, now." My body froze. My legs wouldn't move. We were helpless. We were just prey. And then, just as quickly as it appeared, the creature released Johnson's body and stood still, watching us, waiting. And that's when everything changed. We didn't hesitate. The moment Johnson hit the ground, I shouted the order to retreat. We turned and ran, but the moment we broke cover, the creature's presence seemed to follow us, pressing down on us with an oppressive weight. Every step felt like it took an eternity. We scrambled, disoriented, trying to get back to the extraction point. The firefight that followed was chaos. Our rifles still malfunctioned, so we resorted to anything we could find: rocks, broken equipment, anything to create a barrier between us and whatever was hunting us. It felt like we were being herded, pushed toward the edge of the site. But no matter how far we ran, there was always that horrible sense that it was right behind us, watching us, waiting. Then, it was over. The silence came like a blanket, suffocating, unnatural. No growl, no whisper, just the sound of our ragged breaths and the crackling of broken radios. We made it back to base, but the damage was done. The commander was in shock, refusing to believe what we'd just encountered. He kept asking us for reports, asking for proof. But what proof do you offer when your enemy isn't even real by the rules we know? We were ordered to seal everything, our reports, our statements, marked top secret, never to be seen again. I remember one thing the commander said before we were dismissed. "Well, bury this. No one talks about it, ever." The others were shipped out quietly. Some never returned. The files? Gone, sealed, buried. But what happened next took things to another level. You don't forget something like that. You can't, but no one ever talks about it. I tried to leave it behind, just walk away like they wanted us to, but it doesn't work that way. Once you've seen it, it doesn't leave you. It stays with you, festers in the back of your mind, haunting you in the quiet moments. They think it's buried, erased from history. But I know better. It's still out there, waiting. And those who saw it, most of them are gone, disappeared without a trace. The ones that didn't make it back, no one ever asks questions. They just vanish. I didn't ask for this. I didn't want to know, but it's not something I can forget. And if this video disappears, you'll know why.